It started as a harmless dare, a way to pass the time on a dreary Friday night. We were a group of 4 friends, gathered in the dimly lit living room of our childhood home. The air was thick with anticipation as we scrolled through the endless pages of Reddit's No Sleep subreddit, searching for the perfect creepypasta to inspire our game. How about this one? Alex suggested, his voice barely audible over the soft hum of the ceiling fan. He read aloud a tale of a cursed mirror that could grant wishes, but at a terrible cost. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I listened, a shiver running down my spine. That's the cliché. Sarah scoffed, let's find something original. We continued our search, scrolling through countless stories of haunted houses, malevolent spirits, and supernatural occurrences. Finally, we stumbled upon a particularly chilling tale about a game that could summon the dead. It was a simple game, really, involving a Ouija board and a few candles, but the consequences of playing it were said to be dire. We should play it, Jake said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. It'll be fun. The others exchanged nervous glances. We knew it was a bad idea, but the thrill of the unknown was too tempting to resist. We gathered around the coffee table, lit a few candles, and placed the Ouija board in the center. Let's play, Alex said, his voice barely a whisper. We placed our fingers on the planchette and began to ask questions. At first, nothing happened, but then, slowly, the planchette began to move. It spelled out the letters YES. Is there anything you want to tell us? I asked. The planchette moved again, spelling out the word game. We looked at each other, our hearts pounding in our chests. We had summoned something dark and sinister. The rules of the game were simple. We had to answer the questions posed by the entity on the other side. If we refused to answer, or if we cheated, there would be consequences. The questions were strange and unsettling. The entity asked us about our deepest fears, our darkest secrets. We were forced to confront our own demons, to reveal our vulnerabilities. As the night wore on, the questions became more and more disturbing. The entity seemed to be taunting us, testing our limits. We were terrified, but we couldn't stop playing. We were trapped in this game, and there was no way out. Finally, the entity asked us a question that chilled us to the bone. Are you ready to die? We hesitated for a moment, then answered, no. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out the word death. A cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. We were plunged into darkness, our hearts pounding in our chests. Then we heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the walls. It grew louder and louder, until it sounded like claws raking against the wood. Terror gripped us as we realized what was happening. The entity we had summoned was coming for us. We scrambled to our feet, but it was too late. The walls began to shake, and then they burst open. A horde of dark, shadowy figures poured into the room. We screamed and ran, but it was no use. The creatures were faster than us, stronger than us. One by one, they dragged us into the darkness, never to be seen again. And so, the game ended. We had dared to play with forces beyond our understanding, and we had paid the ultimate price. The Ghostly Hitchhiker. The night was cold and dark, the wind howling through the trees like a mournful ghost. I was driving home from a late shift at the hospital, my headlights cutting through the thick fog. As I passed a deserted stretch of road, I saw a figure standing at the side, their arms outstretched in a gesture of desperation. Feeling a pang of pity, I pulled over to the curb. A young woman, bundled up in a tattered coat, approached my car. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes wide with fear. "Can you give me a ride?" she asked, her voice trembling. Something in her just made me feel obliged. So, after a split second of hesitation, my response was, of course, while unlocking the passenger door. Getting in the car, I thought there was something strange, almost otherworldly about her. Her skin seemed to be translucent, and some kind of haunting glow was held within her eyes. Trying to shut out my instincts, I decided I needed to drive. We drove in silence for a while, except that the windshield wipers ticked rhythmically. Finally, the woman spoke up. "Thank you so much for picking me up," she whispered. I was lost and scared. I nodded, trying to sound reassuring. "No problem," I said. "Where are you headed?" After a moment, she answered, "I'm trying to get out to the old cemetery on the edge of town." Astounded, I turned to her. "The cemetery?" I repeated. "For whatever reason would you want to go there?" She said nothing but turned her head and looked out the window, her eyes fixed on something very distant. As we approached the cemetery, the woman's breathing became shallow and rapid. She seemed to be shaking. "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. She nodded, but there was something weird in her eyes, like a near-vacant expression. "I have to go," she murmured, her voice almost a whisper. "I can't remain here." Before I could say a word, she flung the door open and swung out of the car. She turned to face me, her eyes swimming with a chilling sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "You've been very kind." She vanished into the fog, leaving me all alone on that deserted road, driving away from the sight. Little doubt was there in my mind that I had crossed ways with something truly supernatural. The hitchhiker had disappeared into thin air after disappearing from my car and leaving behind the haunting memory of an awful feeling which refused to go off my mind for a long time. The old Victorian hotel towered above the town, casting a dark and ominous shadow. According to local legend, the hotel was haunted, a place where the spirits of those who had perished within its walls continued to linger. My friends and I, young and foolish, believed it would be an exhilarating adventure to spend a weekend there. We reached the hotel late that Friday night. An eerie silence was in the air, which was pierced by the creaking of wooden floorboards and the mournful howl of wind. The lobby was in dim light, with long swinging shadows on the walls caused by some dust-clothed chandeliers. The air was musty, sweet, with smells of old wood and rot. The receptionist, an elderly woman whose sunken eyes and perpetually grim expression told stories of years gone by, handed us our keys. "Be careful," she cautioned, her voice scarcely rising above a whisper. "Some things are better left undisturbed." We paid her no heed and mounted the creaky flight of stairs leading to our room. A cold draft entered the room as we entered, sending shivers racing down our spines. Antiques furnished it, while on the walls hung worn portraits of people with faces unsmiling. We endeavored to dispel the feeling of unease, yet it proved challenging. The hotel appeared to emanate an aura of darkness and foreboding. We resolved to explore the hotel, seeking some distraction from the unsettling atmosphere. As we meandered through the corridors, peculiar sounds drifted from the forsaken wing of the hotel. Our curiosity ignited, we resolved to explore further. The wing lay shrouded in darkness and dust, cobwebs dangling from the ceiling. Suddenly, we heard a faint scratching sound coming from behind a closed door. We hesitated for a moment, then cautiously approached the door. As we reached for the doorknob, it turned on its own, creaking open. Inside, we found a small, dimly lit room. A single bed stood in the center, the sheets rumpled and unmade. As we stepped into the room, we heard a faint whisper. "Get out," it said. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. We looked around, but there was no one there. The room was empty. Just as we were about to leave, we heard another whisper. This time, it was louder and clearer. "Leave or you'll regret it." We turned and ran, our hearts pounding in our chests. We burst through the door and down the hallway, our footsteps echoing in the empty building. We made it back to our room, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. We locked the door behind us, feeling a sense of relief. But as we sat on the bed, trying to calm our nerves, we realized that we were not alone. A cold draft swept through the room, and the lights flickered and died. We were plunged into darkness, our hearts pounding in our chests. A chilling sensation washed over us, as if we were being watched. Then, we heard it, a faint scratching sound, coming from the walls. It grew louder and louder, until it sounded like claws raking against the wood. Terror gripped us as we realized what was happening. The spirits of the hotel were angry, and they wanted us out. We scrambled to our feet, but it was too late. The walls began to shake, and then they burst open. A horde of dark, shadowy figures poured into the room. We screamed and ran, but it was no use. The creatures were faster than us, stronger than us. One by one, they dragged us into the darkness, never to be seen again. And so, the haunted hotel claimed its victims once more. The legend would live on, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. The eerie silence of the deserted office park was broken only by the distant rumble of traffic on the nearby highway. As I walked towards my car, the setting sun cast long, dancing shadows across the pavement. A chill ran down my spine, a premonition of something sinister lurking in the twilight. I hurried my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The once familiar surroundings now seemed strange and unfamiliar. The towering office buildings loomed over me like menacing giants, their windows reflecting the fading light. As I approached my car, I glanced over my shoulder. To my horror, I saw a dark figure emerging from the shadows. It was a woman, tall and slender, with a face that seemed to shift and change before my eyes. She was moving towards me with unnatural speed, her eyes fixed on me with a chilling intensity. Panic surged through me as I turned to flee, but it was too late. She was upon me, her icy fingers closing around my wrist. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. A cold, dead weight seemed to be pressing down on me, immobilizing me. The woman's face contorted into a grotesque grimace as she whispered something into my ear. Her voice was a chilling whisper, a sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth. I couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. She was here for me. I struggled against her grip, but it was useless. She was stronger than I could ever imagine. With a sickening crunch, she snapped my wrist, sending a wave of pain shooting through my body. As darkness enveloped me, I heard her chilling laughter echoing through the deserted park. The shadows seemed to close in around me, swallowing me whole. I woke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. I was lying on the cold, hard ground, my wrists throbbing with pain. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden glow over the office park. I looked around, but there was no sign of the woman. She was gone, vanished into the darkness. But I knew she was still out there, watching me, waiting for her next victim. As I got into my car and drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The shadows seemed to be closing in around me, and I knew that I would never be truly safe again. It was one of those autumn days, crisp, cool, the sort of day that made you want to wrap yourself in a warm blanket with a cup of steaming hot cocoa. My best friend, Alex, and I decided we needed to take advantage of the fine weather and go on a hike in the nearby woods. We were both nature-like hikers and loved the adventure of wandering into the trails that wound through the lush, dense forest. We struck off, aromatically, into the morning, the sun shredding dappled shadows upon the forest floor, the air heavy with pine resin and the sweet scent of decaying leaves. We strolled and talked, our voices carrying through the trees. It was the same path we had walked innumerable times before, but today it sounded different. There was a sense of some eerie aura hanging within the air, an almost palpable tension that I couldn't quite grasp. I tried to ward off the feeling, but somehow it just wouldn't go away. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the trail became narrower and more winding. The trees grew taller and denser, blocking out the sunlight. The once peaceful forest now seemed dark and foreboding. Suddenly, a peculiar sound reached our ears. It was a low, guttural growl, emanating from the depths of the woods. We stood frozen, our hearts racing in our chests. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked softly. I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. It sounded like... Before I could complete my sentence, the sound echoed once more. This time, it resonated with a greater intensity and proximity. From the underbrush, a large, dark shape emerged. It was a bear, an immense beast that loomed over us. We turned and fled, our legs working as swiftly as they could manage. The bear pursued us, its growls reverberating through the dense forest. We could hear its heavy footsteps thundering behind us, drawing nearer with every moment. Just as we were afraid we were about to be overtaken, we saw a small clearing up ahead. Bursting through the trees into that small open space, we clung to the hope of evading the bear. But the bear was hot on our heels. It charged toward us, its claws outstretched. We scrambled to climb a nearby tree just in time as the bear lunged and grabbed at our ankles. We were holding onto the branches, our hearts beating in our chests. The bear circled the tree, growling and snarling. We knew we were trapped. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we heard a rustling in the bushes. A large, muscular figure emerged from the undergrowth. It was a man, armed with a rifle. The bear saw the man and turned to face him. The man raised his rifle and fired. The bullet hit the bear in the chest, sending it crashing to the ground. We breathed a sigh of relief as the bear lay motionless. The man approached us cautiously, his eyes scanning the woods for any other threats. "Are you all right?" he asked. We nodded, our voices trembling. We thanked the man for saving our lives. He introduced himself as a park ranger and told us that he had been patrolling the area when he heard our screams. We were grateful to be safe, but the experience had shaken us to our core. We had come so close to being killed by a wild animal. As we made our way back to the trailhead, we couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The woods, once a place of peace and tranquility, now seemed dark and dangerous. We knew that we would never forget that day, and we would think twice before venturing into the forest again.